Hello and welcome to this episode of Young Guns. We are having a sit down interview, year in review with one Brandon Olson from Locked On Gators. Um, Let me first say that I am deeply sorry about the gaping hole in all of Gator Nation's hearts for that bad loss.
Yeah, it was a horrible game to watch. It was some of the least fun I've ever had watching Florida football, easily.
But on the bright side, you got the Florida Gators haven't been shut out. It's their 456th game that they haven't been shut out. Now,
Yeah,
anybody remember when the last time it was when Florida got shut out?
before I was alive,
Ooh, what year were you born?
95.
Well, it was 7 years before you were born, 1988, October 29th, against the Auburn Tigers during the Pat Dye era.
Yeah, it's a long freaking time. I'll say if Billy Napier got shut out in his first year with how Gators fans are already reacting to everything that happens, oh man, that I don't know if he'd be able to recover from that one.
Ooh, that they'd be throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
I
So,
don't know. The way he's been coaching all year, it doesn't seem like it would be a throwing the baby out with the bathwater situation. I mean, yeah, it's his first year, but the way the coaching goes nowadays, especially with the universities in college sports, it's like, win or get out of here. Because
yeah.
our fan base is so used to winning and being on top or near the top that it's like, if we have a down year, this is not fair and you misled us.
True, especially in the SEC where it's just a woof if you're a head coach.
Yeah, Dan Mullen made the SEC championship in 2020, had one bad year in 2021, and got the boot.
Yeah, that was well, I think he'll be back pretty soon coaching.
Well, it's like, I bet he would like this, but it's like, whenever Saban leaves, Alabama is going to turn into Ohio State coaching wise before Woody Hayes, where it's coach after coach after coach. Because Saban, yes, he's done a good job, great job at Alabama, but he's put Alabama up here, and it's like they went 10-2 this year, possibly could go 11-2, and they're already saying we're like going in a downward direction, and we want something better. And it's like, just enjoy that you have 10 wins. Because there's a lot of schools that are either overrated and can't even get 6 wins, A&M, or there's schools, that are like Florida and just have a down year.
Right.
So what do you think, in your opinion and your assessment of the season as a whole, what do you think caused the season to turn out the way it did? I mean, what was like the expectations with the fan base going in, and before the season started, what was their opinion of Sunbelt Billy, as people love to call him?
Well, I mean, I think record wise, we were kind of going into the year saying, okay, 6 wins is kind of the expectation. Obviously, you would hope for a little bit more, but no, we're going to end with 6-7 record. Getting bowl eligible was an important thing for this staff, mainly because they wanted 15 extra practices that you get with a bowl game, but then their bowl game was 10 days later. So you couldn't even get the 15 extra practices there. But bowl eligible was kind of the goal. I know that obviously Billy Napier's at the podium and he's like, oh, well, we want to win the SEC. Not happening. But although I do respect, going, oh, well, we want to win every game like every school does. But 6 wins was kind of the goal. And then you you beat Utah number 7 week 1, and the goal is like, oh, maybe 9 wins, and then Kentucky, and you almost lose to South Florida, and you have the great game against Tennessee in which you still lose though. And it was just up and down, and I think that a lot of it just came down to this team is indicative of what recruiting does to a program, where Dan Mullen that's one of the reasons that, we say, he made the SEC championship, had one bad year, and then got fired. A big part of that was that he did not put in the needed work on the recruiting trail. So Dan Mullen would have these, number 9 class in the country. And then you look at who is in that class and you go, who the hell are these people? And most of it are kids who weren't eligible, never panned out. There's a good reason that a lot of Dan Mullen kids that hit the transfer portal from Florida are now going to Group of 5 programs because they're not SEC players. They're not Power 5 players, but Dan Mullen brought them in without doing due diligence, and they are there. And then you see Billy Napier come in, and you see this team, they kept games close for the most part. Every game that they were underdogs in, they covered the spread. So they did that. They kept it close enough. But this was just a team where you could see the talent wasn't there for the most part. You look at the defense, and as much as we love some of those guys, they shouldn't have been starting, and they wouldn't start on a great college football program. But because that's what they had, that's what they had.
You basically already answered the question, but I was going to ask about the expectations coming into the season. And yes, like you said, about 6-7 wins probably. But then when they beat Utah, then as you said as well, 9, maybe 10 wins if everything breaks their way. But to your point, Florida's inconsistencies, I agree with you. I think a lot of it had to do with the roster, and even Anthony Richardson himself. He was so inconsistent all season long. He is a great talent, and he could be a really good NFL quarterback, but his play for Florida this year did not help them win games because at times he, basically led the team and was able to win a lot of games. And then, that maybe Florida wasn't expected to win like Utah and then blowing out South Carolina the way that they did and hanging against Tennessee, but then losing to Vanderbilt, almost losing to South Florida. I think that it was a team-wide issue, as you kind of mentioned with the defense, but a lot of it also was Anthony Richardson. Basically, what was the main culprit of their inconsistencies? Was it just the whole team, or was it a certain amount of players?
I think when you look at the defense, especially early on, there were a lot of big plays. They gave, like that Tennessee game, they gave up a lot of big plays, and a lot of that was just miscommunication errors hampered the team, which is one of the most frustrating things because this is a team where Gators fans like to talk about Trey Dean, number 0, the safety, as the guy who's the culprit that always has the blown coverages and the miscommunications. He's his 5th-year senior. There's a lot of guys where it's like they're making these mistakes. And yes, you can say, oh, it's their first year in this system. Like, that's understandable. But at the same time, you're in your 5th year in college. You are the veteran in that room. You shouldn't have communication issues. Like you can just be bad and you can have blown coverages and all that, but it shouldn't be because of a communication issue. That was the completely unacceptable thing where you look at the defense, consistently communication issues. You look at the offense, penalties killed them. Kingsley Aguaca, the starting center, is the most penalized Power 5 offensive lineman in college football over the past 2 years. I think he was the 4th most penalized in 2021, and I think he's the 2nd most in 2022. He's the only guy that high on the list twice. So penalties like that, just major inconsistencies, and just flat out the Vanderbilt game, they just didn't show up. I don't know if that's on the coaching staff or if it was, we don't play in 30 degrees weather or whatever it was, but they just did not show up to play SEC football. And I don't know if it was overlooking Vanderbilt, but it was just a crappy performance all throughout. And you mentioned Anthony Richardson's inconsistencies.
Yeah.
I've been saying this since last year when he was still a backup. I'm like, Anthony Richardson is one of the most physically gifted human beings on the planet. People his size don't move the way he moves. And if they do, they're usually playing receiver or tight end. They're not able to throw the ball the way that he throws the ball. But there are certain times where he couldn't hit the side of a barn if he was throwing the side of a barn. Like he's been so inconsistent at certain points, and it's incredibly frustrating, but that's who he is. Again, that's why I think it was smart for him also to go to the NFL draft, because at least now you've got 1 year of hit and miss tape. And you can go, okay, well, he's got an insane ceiling. The potential is there for him to be great. Let's draft him in the 1st round. If he came back for a 2nd year as a starter in Florida and he did that same inconsistent play, then the question becomes, is this just who Anthony Richardson is? And it's not so much about the allure and potential that he has. So think it was a good move for him to go, as much as I love him. But yeah, it was just a lot of stuff went wrong this year for the Florida Gators.
So it
Well,
sounds like, based on what you said about after the Utah game, it sounds like a lot of fan bases do. Florida looked at that win and was like, "Oh, okay, we can move the goalpost now." And then it's like, nope, you get mollywopped by Kentucky the next week, and it's like, no, we got to pull it back.
yeah, I
Yeah.
noticed a lot of people in media and everybody as a whole, and I myself was guilty of it as well. After that victory over Utah, like everybody as a whole kind of just threw the cart in before the horse with Florida after that victory over Utah. Everyone's like, oh man, they're gonna get revenge against Kentucky in the swamp, But like after that loss to Kentucky for the second straight year. Now, this was the first time since 1976 and 1977 that Florida lost to Kentucky in consecutive years. What was that like, seeing that?
It really sucked. I hate Kentucky especially, so it really sucked. But it was just, it's one of those games where Kentucky is the kind of school where they're going to come out and they're just going to be physical with you. And if you're not going to match them, then they're going to drag you down and beat the crap out of you. And that's what happened. And that, like, the first 2 weeks of the season was perfectly what you get with Anthony Richardson. You get the Utah game where he had, I believe it was a 45-yard rushing touchdown on the scramble. He rolls out left. No one catches him. He does that 2-point conversion where he pump fakes, spins, rolls out, and gets the 2-point conversion to Jaquavian Frazier's. And those are great things. And then you look at the Kentucky game, and he throws a pick six directly at the defender, where the running back, even though he's running a curl route, is still 6 yards away from the ball. And it was just horrible. And then he can't complete the forward pass. Like, I remember after the South Florida game, I did a video and I was like, dude, just go triple option or teach Anthony Richardson what the forward pass is, because he can't do it consistently. And that's just that. We started the year seeing the highest and the lowest of Anthony Richardson. And every game after that, it seems he was kind of bouncing back and forth between that, where he would turn it over and then he'd have 3 games without a turnover. And it was just wildly inconsistent and wildly frustrating. And the Kentucky game also especially pissed me off because towards the end of the game, Will Levis is standing on the benches and he's standing on the barrier between the crowd and he's just waving. And yeah, and then a few days later, I don't know if you saw, but they ate fried alligator. So that was, yeah.
And another tough result this season as well is you have Tennessee. Yeah, their big win this year was that they finally knocked off Alabama, but they also beat Florida. And again, they've had a tough time doing that the last 2 decades. Florida's owned that rivalry. And I mean, like you said, actually, Florida played really well in that game, but still a loss really hurt there as well.
Yeah, that was a fun one when I was previewing it with Eric Kane of Locked On Vols, where we were doing the game preview and him, he's a Vols fan. He covers the Vols. They were having an incredible year before the Florida game. And he's in there going, I don't know, some reason Florida always wins. Some screwy thing happens and Florida always wins. So he's picking Florida. I'm in there going, it's going to be Tennessee's year. So both of us were just like, none of us were confident in what was going to happen. Neither of us were confident in our teams. And the Vols game is just Hendon Hooker's one hell of a quarterback. Brenton Cox and Trey Dean made some crucial errors. Anthony Richardson, fantastic fourth quarter, fantastic way to fight back into the game and never give up. His Hail Mary attempt was one of the worst Hail Mary attempts I've seen, where it had to go like 55 yards and he threw it 45, and we've seen him throw the ball 65 yards in the air. So I don't know what he was doing on the Hail Mary. He does have the worst Hail Mary attempts I've ever seen. He had that one where he undershot it. And then I forgot which game it was, but he threw it like into the 4th row behind the end. I don't know what he was doing there. Maybe depth perception issues. I don't know, but it was very rough. And yeah, losing to Tennessee and Kentucky in the same year really sucks.
Yeah. What were the strengths of the Florida Gators in 2022 that people may not know?
I'm sorry, it like broke up for a second.
I said,
He said, what are the strengths from this year's team that people may not know?
Um, that's a very good question. I think when you look at the youth of the team, there were a lot of young players that stepped up that you didn't really anticipate. Devin Moore, true freshman, came in as a corner and got playing time until he got injured. Kamari Wilson stepped in as a safety whenever he was needed. Princely Uman stepped in as someone who we were talking about as, oh, last year when he played, he was pretty good, but he didn't play often. So it's a small sample size. It's hard to evaluate him, especially when you're coming in as a rotational player. And it's like, yeah, well, you're going against starters that have been playing. You get to come in fresh legs and do whatever you want. So him stepping up, it was awesome. Austin Barber and Osiris Torrance were two of the brightest spots on the offensive line, where this is a Gators offensive line for the past decade hasn't been good. It's been Florida's had consistently bad offensive line where even the guys that get drafted high, like Jawan Taylor, don't work out for a long time in the NFL. So this is the best offensive line we've seen in a long time. A lot of youth coming in, but there weren't many bright spots. It's pretty telling that, everybody goes, oh, G5 Billy. And he brought in a couple of guys from Louisiana, and they were immediately the best players on the team. And Montrell Johnson and Osiris Torrance was an All-American. So it's pretty telling that the talent on this team, the best players, were transfer players from the group of five.
On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best, 1 being the worst, where would you rate the 2022 Florida season? Because there have been some ups and downs, right? The win over Utah. I mean, that was a big bright side, and that win over South Carolina, beating them up 38-6. That was a big bright side. But that Kentucky loss, the Tennessee loss, that missed field goal from South Florida, in helping you beat South Florida, which they're awful. So, but that victory over Texas A&M at Kyle Field, where would you rate it at a scale from 10?
I'd say like a 4. I'm obviously not happy with the year. 6 wins was the expectation, but you always want to exceed expectations. I get it. Someone has to not reach expectations, and there's going to be a lot of people that do hit exactly that, but you always want to be on the side that excels. So I'd say like a 4. It's one of those things where, winning against Utah was awesome. And Utah showed all season that they weren't pretenders. Like it was a quality win, but then you have the missed field goal to beat South Florida, a team that fired their head coach halfway through the season. You have the Tennessee loss, the Kentucky loss, were both like the Kentucky loss. It sucked, especially because it was just such a bad football game. Like all Florida had to do was show up and be average, and they win that game. Like they just had to be average and they win that football game. But since they played like absolute crap, they got mollywopped by a team that shouldn't have beaten them. And losing to Vanderbilt is completely unacceptable. The bowl game, I get it. You were down like 25 players, you had 55 guys available for the game. It was just a catastrophic failure of massive, like multiple levels, just completely failed. Your offensive line, you lost Osiris Torrance is the one guy you lost for that bowl game, and your offensive line played like crap. And I refuse to believe that it's like, yeah, this one guard made enough of a difference where he made the whole O-line good. Like they just didn't show up. So it was wild inconsistencies, losing games you shouldn't have lost. I know before I was like, yeah, they covered the spread when they were underdogs. I'd like more wins when you're an underdog, and I'd like more wins and covering the spread when you're actually favored. But Florida did a really fun thing where up until the bowl game, every game they were underdogs in, they covered. Every game that they were favored in, they did not cover the spread. And, the saying is good teams win, great teams cover the spread. Florida didn't do that. They weren't a great team. And then, of course, the bowl game, they got absolutely annihilated.
Yeah, I didn't
to your
want
point about the bowl game, I think it's very interesting how a lot of people would say that since they had all the opt-outs and the transfer portal players, that's why Florida lost by as much as they did. And then there are some people that will argue, well, Florida would have lost the game anyway, even if they had all their starting players, because of the fact that they were inconsistent to begin with. I disagree, because if Florida had all their players, I feel that it depends on which Florida team showed up. Florida has shown this season that they were capable of knocking off teams. If Florida played at their best with Anthony Richardson and a full team, I think they can beat Oregon State, or they could have beaten Oregon State. But if they play like they did against Vanderbilt with a full team, of course they're not going to win. So I don't think that any narrative is really right, because you wouldn't have known how Florida would have played. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, you're perfectly right. Like you can't go, oh, well, if Florida was healthy, they win that game, because we saw them play like crap while they were healthy. So you can't just say, oh, if they're fully healthy, they win the game. You can't say if they're fully healthy, they lose the game, because like you said, it's a matter of who's going to show up. Are we getting Utah Anthony Richardson, where he can run the ball as much as he wants on anybody? Are we getting Tennessee Anthony Richardson, where he throws for 400 something yards? Or are we getting Kentucky Anthony Richardson, where he might as well be spiking the ball every single time that they call a passing play, and it's just horrible football. So you're right, where you can't really go, if they have all their players, they win. If they don't have all their players, they lose. I do hate the whole, I have no problem with players opting out. I just hate that it then opens the conversation of, well, if they had a healthy full roster, they win. I don't care, because they didn't have a healthy full roster. Any given week, you can be like, oh, well, our starting quarterback just tore his ACL, and now we're significantly worse. And people are going to go, well, if they had their starting quarterback, they'd be winning games. We have no idea. There's no point in playing this hypothetical game. But if Florida had their full roster, they probably still lose, but it's probably a lot closer than, 30-3. It's probably way closer than that, but they probably still lose. Oregon State was a very good football team. Like, I don't know why it's also surprising that the number 15 team in the country beat up on an unranked team. Like you should beat up on an unranked team. I get it, SEC to Pac-12, and Florida beat the Pac-12 champions this year, so there's that. But yeah, it's hard to be like, oh, well, if Florida was healthy, because they've been so inconsistent, like you said.
Yeah.
So to your point and Jeffrey's point, and going back to like when I said moving the goalpost, it seemed like around here there are some. I'm up in Ohio, and so I'm I'm a Buckeye fan, and some of the people I work with happen to be Florida fans. Some more logical, and some on the other end of the spectrum. And so, from the ones on the other end of the spectrum, it was like, oh, we started 2-1 with a new head coach. We are going to the national championship. We can beat anybody. And you know what? Ohio State sucks so bad this year. We could run them over like a dump truck. And I'm like, 3 weeks in, you might want to cool it and maybe pull back on your expectations. You are a first year head coach, and he is coming from the group of five, which I feel like it does make a difference, because it's like, so we've been saying that like Jamie Chadwell is a lateral move because it's the same level, where Billy coming from the group of five to the P5 is a raise. It's coming up. It's a step up. So, I mean, of course, you have all those kind of fans everywhere, but it kind of cracked me up looking back now. It's like, Natty. You're
Yeah,
a few years away.
I had a lot of fun with it, because after the Utah game, I didn't really change as to whether I was like, okay, 6 to 7 wins is the expectation. But I kept saying that, and I said that the first show after the Utah game. I was like, look, it's awesome to win against Utah, but like, this is still a team that's probably going to win 6 or 7 games this year. And I still remember I got a comment that was like, oh, I came here to celebrate a win, and instead I'm getting the guy that's pissing on my pancakes. And it's like, well, I'm just trying to be honest with you here, because that's what it is. And by the way, you said that you have some like logical Florida Gators fans. Cherish them. They're far and few between, so cherish them. Because yeah, a lot of people, when you beat Utah, they started going nuts with the expectations, and it's very difficult to do. I will say that going into the Utah game, I said Florida had one very distinct advantage over Utah, in that you can use all the tape you want from Billy Napier and Patrick Toney at Louisiana, But the fact of the matter is they have different kinds of athletes when you're with Florida. They had different players, better players at certain positions where you kind of opened up the playbook and it let you get to do a lot of different things that even if you see the scheme on film from last year, the concept on film from last year, it could look a lot different because you're doing it with better athletes and different players. So I think one advantage was not really knowing what to expect from Florida for Utah, where I expected things after spending months trying to learn what Billy Napier and Patrick Toney do. I saw things during the Utah game where I was like, oh, okay, I was expecting something different to be going on here, where I'd imagine it's similar to guys who didn't have months and months to spend preparing for that one game.
Yeah. I just going back to Anthony Richardson. It's funny kind of having Florida fans up here and being able to be outside of the fan base and look at how, because like even so as far as the wins go and where they were gonna go, you had those logical fans, but the logical fans for that kind of changed when it came to Anthony himself, because it was like Utah week, it was like, yes, Anthony's awesome. I love Anthony Richardson. He's totally cool. And Kentucky happens, and one dude's like, screw Anthony. He needs to be benched. He needs to get out of here. We don't want him anymore. Screw him. And then USF happened, and it's like, oh, by the skin of our teeth. I don't know how to feel about Anthony. And then it just kept going back and forth all season. I'm just standing there listening to him, and I'm just, oh my god. Sometimes these fans can be just funny.
Yeah, it's insane. Like Anthony Richardson is wildly inconsistent. He's always been that. And that's why when people were like, oh, like he should be benched, I had so many comments that were like, he should just play tight end. You can't throw the football. And so many things like that where it's like Anthony Richardson is Josh Allen when he was at Wyoming. Like Josh Allen when he was at Wyoming was a big dude that didn't throw with touch at all. He just threw fireballs at everybody every time. And he wanted to hurdle you. He wanted to run through you. He wanted to do these things. That's Anthony Richardson. And he was wildly inconsistent. Josh Allen was wildly inconsistent in college, as is Anthony Richardson. But if you have a guy who could become Josh Allen, you go through the crappy periods, because if he ever does get to what he could be, he's going to be phenomenal. He's going to be a freak. So you go through it. And that's why when we went with Anthony Richardson, I was just like, hey, man, there's going to be good weeks. There are going to be bad weeks. But either way, I'm just wee, and I'm going to have fun with it and just go with whatever happens.
So this year, even though you got lost to Florida State this year, what was it like getting to play on Black Friday instead of like a regular Saturday? Like I thought that was pretty cool personally. What did you think, Brandon?
I hated it, mainly because I was traveling that day. So I was like, oh, now I have to like change things around instead of just relaxing on that Saturday. But it was cool where there weren't many games going on at that time. So it was really awesome to just like see Twitter nationally just like tweeting about Florida versus Florida State. And just, it was a good game to begin with. Like it started off hot with just Florida had a couple big play touchdowns to Ricky Pearsall, and Florida State was doing their thing. So it was a fun game. It was fun to see national people just talking about it because everybody was able to watch it. Would have preferred winning, but I will also say that it was maybe the most pathetic storming of the field I've ever seen, because it was a ranked team beating an unranked team and not even covering the spread at that point. So it's like you won by less than you were expected to, and you stormed the field. You were double-digit favorites and you stormed the field. That's embarrassing to me. So, hey man, like good for you if you're a Knowles fan and that makes you feel good, but that is just yikes.
But yeah, hopefully next year they play on Black Friday again. You know, that'd be pretty cool. At least to me.
I think that's the expectation. I think the expectation from now on is to be Black Friday.
Yeah, that would be pretty neat. But what are the bright sides for Florida that they should look forward to in 2023?
In 2023, I think one of the brightest things I'm looking forward to is just seeing how the defense progresses. Patrick Toney at Louisiana, when he was there, his first year, they had like the 110th ranked defense. And then his second year, they had like 65th or 70th, and they made a huge jump. So I'm hoping that Florida, obviously, I'm not hoping that they jump 40 spots because that's not realistic. But making a big leap would be great to see, where it's guys that are built for your system, guys that you recruited to play. This 2023 recruiting class is probably going to be the class that plays more immediately as any other class. You look at whether you're talking about any other 2023 class as far as other schools go, they're not going to play as much as Florida's 2023 class. And you look at Florida's 2024 class, they're not going to play as much as Florida's 2023 class, because this is the time where you're kicking out all those 22 kids that hit the transfer portal from Florida. Yeah. Few of them played significant snaps. Some of them are going to Akron, Tennessee, Chattanooga. Those aren't SEC guys. So bringing in players that you're like, okay, we think they can contribute right away. We know they can contribute right away, and they're going to be able to play, and they're going to be a fit, is huge. Where same way the youth was the bright spot for the Florida Gators this year, youth should be a bright spot next year. That's what I'm looking forward to the most, more than anything else.
So, as of right now, the recruit class is 12th in the nation. What's your can't get any higher, or does it get lower? Does it same?
Should be higher, but Florida doesn't like to throw money at high school recruits, so it's lower than it should be. And I'm not even complaining about that. Like I know NIL is a thing, and we can talk about how they can't pay recruits until they get on campus. We know what really happens behind closed doors.
Oh, yeah.
Florida's not doing it. Florida's not doing it, and because of that, they're falling behind. And I think it's hard to look at it and say you should pay them, because in the long run, you don't know what's better. Because Florida's approach is get kids that want to be Florida Gators. And when they want bigger NIL opportunities, then you pay them to stay. But you get them there by wanting to be Gators, as opposed to other programs like Texas A&M had the highest ranked 2022 recruiting class because they paid a bunch of kids. And a bunch of them already left. They're already leaving. They're already transferring. So it's hard to say which approach is right, because you don't really know yet, because the teams on top are the teams that have been on top right now. Like the top four teams outside of TCU were kind of expected to be in this range anyway. So it's hard to say which approach is the correct approach as to should you pay high school kids or should you not pay high school kids and then pay them when they want NIL opportunities after they're on campus. We'll find out. We'll see if Miami wins a championship, then congrats. But one of the things also with paying recruits is now you have that expectation of, we're spending millions on these kids. We need to win some football games. So we'll see in 3 to 4 years once NIL kind of levels out a little bit, and we'll see who the major players are and who aren't, and who took the right approach.
So I guess to go ahead and close us out here, you want to tell everybody where they can find you and maybe a little preview of what you have coming up over the next week?
Yeah, you can find me every Monday through Friday on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts with Locked On Gators. I have an interview with a Gator football player that I just recorded yesterday. We've got women's basketball players, because we cover football, basketball, baseball, softball, all that fun stuff. You can find me there. You can find written work with Giants Country of SportsIllustrated.com, covering the New York Giants there. And find me on Twitter with WNS_Brandon.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on and doing this interview with us. And I guess we're gonna call it an end here. So
thanks for being here, man.
Of course. Thank you guys for having me.